and give this presentation. Uh, so first of all, Shri Umesh Sinha ji, Deputy Election Commissioner, Election Commission of India, Professor Shahani, Professor Veni Madhavan, Professor Purvi Arora, Professor Craig Burton, members from CDAC, NIC, Election Commission of India, ladies and gentlemen. In this session that we are actually talking of challenges, finding out what the key challenges are in remote voting, I thought I will talk about that. So, and I'll also look at what are the current trends and what are the current technologies which are available. So first of all, often it is a confusion in the terminologies, e-voting, r-voting, I-voting. So I thought first let's look at what these conventions, what these terminologies are. E-voting or electronic voting is defined as using electronic systems to assist in the voting processes. Now, this includes various kinds of technologies. For example, punch cards based things. There are these mechanical devices. You put the button, a particular hole is punched onto the card, and then these cards are then later scanned using electronic technologies, using optical technologies, and then they are counted. These are also e-voting things. Optical scan voting systems, again, you mark something somewhere, and then these are like OMR, optical mark readers. A bubble is filled, and then they are scanned. That's also another technology of e-voting. Direct recording electronic voting machines, the one that is being used in India, is the one where you press a button and the vote is then recorded directly. So it's a direct recorded machines or DREs. Internet voting is yet another platform. All of these are effectively e-voting technology. Now, if you look at e-voting, there are two kinds of categories which are possible. One is supervised e-voting, like for example EVMs. So you set up a polling booth, polling officers, the voters will queue up for the voting, mark their vote, come back. So it's supervised voting. Or it could be a remote voting. Now, remote voting basically will mean, in this context when I'm saying remote voting, it means unsupervised voting. But the remote voting itself can be a supervised voting, and I'm going to talk about this a little later. Now, remote voting basically means using machines and the web technologies to transfer your vote, to cast your vote. And in this particular presentation, when I'm referring to e-voting, I really mean r-voting and I-voting. And in the context, when I'm talk about, I'll keep bringing more clarity on that. Let's look at the remote voting as it is happening in the world. I think Estonia was the first country which adopted e-voting in 2005 in a major recognizable, in a public election basis. Estonia national ID card is actually a smart card. It carries a lot of security and lot of identity related information, access control mechanisms. This was used to identify voters and allow them to vote through internet. So they can actually put their cards into the system, and then accordingly they are allowed to do the voting through internet. In 2005, when it was introduced, only about 10,000 people voted and used this technology. But then in 2007, this internet voting was first time used in a major election for national election. In 2005, it was only for a local election. In 2014, European parliamentary elections were carried out in Estonia, and about 1/3, 30% of the voting was through internet. Now this is a trend. So starting from 10,000 to about 30% of the total votes cast being on internet. Now that's the trend that we are actually seeing. If you look at the US electoral system, in US electoral system, each state makes its own mechanisms for voting. right, defines its own mechanism. Somewhere it is a paper-based thing, somewhere it is a mechanical system, somewhere it's an electronic system, somewhere it's an internet-based system. In US, Arizona state actually introduced e-voting in this form through internet with the help of a password, PIN, person identity number. This PIN were delivered through mail to the voters. And voters actually had an option to either vote from internet or from the regular channel. And those who voted from internet were required to provide their PIN onto the system. And in addition to this, answer 2 personal questions for verification purpose. And once a person is identified, he then casts a vote. In India, recently Gujarat experimented with this, the state of Gujarat, and the first internet voting initiative was done for municipal corporation elections in April 2011. The registered voters were given a unique identity code to log in and then vote online. So it was a login based system. And there are various other countries which have experimented electronic voting in various ways, e-voting in various ways. Canada, France, Finland, Netherlands, Switzerland, EU, etc., etc. They have all experimented with e-voting or internet-based voting in some form or other. Today we are actually going to look at some of these technologies by the champions who have actually provided these technologies in various places. Let's look at the problems in India. We have our polling booth-based voting, electronic voting, EVM-based DRE voting. But in addition to that, there are several voters. So in these places, voters actually go and queue up into the polling booth and vote. But there are several voters who actually cannot do so because of their own job requirement. For example, service voters, the army, the defense personnel, or the police and paramilitary forces which are deployed for election duty. Now by definition they have to be deployed into a place which is a remote place so that they don't know local people, right? And therefore they can carry out their polling duty without any biases. Now, because of that definition, they are actually always away from their own constituencies, and therefore they are not able to vote using DREs. Overseas voters, we have a big NRI diaspora. Many of them are voters, but they are, because they cannot come for voting, it's too expensive, and therefore they are effectively not included in the voting process. They are deprived of the voting rights. And of course, poll duty personals. So somebody who is actually given a poll duty in some constituency, he may be actually belonging to another constituency and therefore he is not able to vote. Now, Election Commission actually realized these problems and gave several solutions for such voting, which are largely manual voting, postal ballots. So in other words, a ballot paper is given or sent to such people in advance, and they can then mark their vote and then return their vote. These are called postal ballots. Or proxy voting, somebody else can do on behalf of them. Or e-voting is yet another option, which is what we are now exploring. Now let me just, in a very brief, voting problem is a very simple problem. So I thought I should actually, simple diagram should be able to actually say what it is. There is a regulatory body, like in India it is the Election Commission of India. Election Commission of India itself may have a multiple hierarchical structure, returning officer, presiding officer, and so on and so forth, but I am grouping all of that into a single ECI. ECI actually delivers the ballot to the voter. It could be in the form of voting machines, it could be in the form of postal ballots, it could be in the form of various other things. So the voting problem is when a ballot, an empty ballot is delivered to the voter. So it's a voter connecting with the ECI through ballot. Ballot is delivered by the ECI to voter, and voter then marks his choice on that ballot and returns the vote, and I am calling this as a vote or filled ballot, back to the authority ECI. So this is a very simple thing. So in this terminology I want to actually define two things, ballot and vote, right? and especially ballot delivery and vote collection. And there are various kinds of options which actually exist, especially for distant voting. So we are not looking at paper voting now. There are at least 4 cases. It can be either postal or electronic. So if ballot delivery is postal or vote collection is postal, or ballot delivery is electronic, vote collection is postal, or one is postal, the other one is electronic, or both are electronic. Now in this particular case, if you look at, case 1 is nothing but the postal ballot system, right? The ballot is actually sent out by post, voter marks his choice on the ballot and returns things by the post again. So it's a postal ballot system. Case 3 is actually a not very useful case. It's only for the, because using binary numbers we can always create 4 cases, and therefore this is there. If you can actually deliver the vote electronically, there is no reason why postal thing should be there at all, because if it is ballot which is delivered in the post, then from post it has to be converted to electronic media, and then electronically it has to be converted into a vote. So the case 3 is actually absolutely a redundant case. So effectively what we are talking of is only case 2 and case 4, which is basically 2 options of using electronic media. Electronic ballot delivery and postal vote collection. This is the first one, which we are calling as e-postal ballot as opposed to the postal ballot. And electronic ballot delivery with electronic vote collection, and this is what we are talking of as remote voting or internet-based voting. So these are the 2 options that we have. Now when we actually look at the e-voting, there are many more things that actually open up. Electronic media, first of all, we all actually are aware of financial frauds. We talk about phishing frauds, we talk about various kinds of frauds that keep happening on electronic media. So electronic media has several concerns. Largely 2 concerns that I talk about, they emanate from the same thing. One, that the communication, anybody who has a pair of wires can actually tap onto the internet media some way or the other and can start looking at various things. So there is this concern that communication is visible to others. Of course, there are technologies and techniques to safeguard against that. And the second one is that there is no physical artifact. In other words, I vote onto the screen, my vote actually gets recorded, and I don't get any paper or anything or any proof that I have done this. Okay? And therefore, there is a voter verifiability of the option, which is actually another technology that one needs to have if one has to go for e-voting. In India, we will have no other option. If at all if we go for e-voting, we have to adopt dual voting system. The existing voting system and e-voting system. Currently, DRE based voting is already there. I-voting is going to be another thing. It also brings some more issues. DRE voting is not connected to internet. There is an attendance system of the voter who all have voted. Now, we need to ensure that a voter does not vote twice. If it is not connected on the internet and there is a voter who actually votes on the I-voting framework, then if he actually lines up at the polling booth, one would not know whether he has voted or not. And therefore, that brings another attendance system concern. There are other issues. These are largely issues for voting in general, and they become little more important because they have to be looked at from a different viewpoint for our voting or I-voting perspective. Voter privacy. A voter has to vote anonymously. Voter privacy is important. The second one is vote confidentiality. Now, when I'm talking about vote confidentiality, it has nothing to do with the voter. It is vote which is confidential. It should remain confidential till the day of the counting. And at the end of the counting, on the day of the counting, this confidentiality is broken. The vote is then counted, and after that, this confidentiality is no reason for it to be there. And the third one is vote anonymity, which means the association between voter and vote has to be confidential. One should not know which voter has voted for which particular option, and this should remain forever, unless there are special cases where this anonymity might need to be broken. But Those are the three major issues which actually needs to be there. They bring up to various kinds of other things. Identification of the voter is important because that is required for voter attendance. And dispute resolution, tomorrow voter may come up and say, no, I never voted, but it shows that there is a vote cast on me. Or, I voted for party X, please show me that have you voted for party X or not. Please prove that you have voted for party X. So these are the other issues that actually come up. And has my vote been counted? These are the three major issues that actually come up with e-voting. So, apart from these, there are many more other issues which are largely in terms of usability. For example, only eligible voters to be allowed to vote, which means we need to have authentication. Authentication was for attendance, but eligibility also is going to be another thing. Uniqueness, eligible voter can only vote once. Accuracy, votes are recorded correctly. Integrity, votes cannot be altered or deleted. Verifiability, the system has ability to verify that votes are correctly counted. Reliability, the system should not compromise votes upon failure. For example, if a system fails, then what happens to all those votes which have been cast, right? Secrecy, votes should remain secret till the day of the counting. So I talked about this, vote confidentiality. Anonymity, votes should remain anonymous. Flexibility, it should be possible to cater to multiple different kinds of voters. For example, voters which are hearing impaired, voters which are visually impaired, voters which may not know one language and therefore the ballot has to be delivered in multiple languages, or illiterate voters who cannot read. Various kinds of category of voters are there. Convenience, the voting process should be convenient. Certifiability, it should be testable, it should be certifiable. Transparency, voters should be able to understand the system in general, that what is happening. And cost, all this coming at a lower cost. So these are the concerns that one actually talks about for e-voting. Now, I'll talk about few issues. Electoral attendance in a dual, I already talked about this. In a dual system, there is no mechanism to find a DRE booth if a voter has voted electronically or not. And therefore, it requires a separate registration, right? So you need to segregate the voters who are going to go into the DRE-based booth or who are going to actually take part into the I-voting. So you need to do a segregation, and therefore this segregation can be done only by registration process. Registration of choices. Those who are registered for our voting will not be permitted for DRE-based booth voting. In other words, the DRE attendance roll, electoral roll, will actually not carry their name. Or if they carry their name, it will be clearly indicated that they have opted for I-voting or R-voting. Now the interesting thing is that this registration system must take place, must be in place and must close that registration prior to the electoral roll printing for the polling booths. And therefore it must be sufficiently well in advance, it should be in place, and it must close prior to DRE booth printing. In particular, we are talking of right now two categories of voter to start with: service voters and NRIs. Service voters can be done by using service rolls. NRI voters can be by self-declaration or by passport and immigration data and these kind of things. Registration requires authentication as well as authorization. So first is, if it is a self-declaration, then a voter comes and says, I want to register for this, I need to look at and I need to authenticate the voter saying, are you the right person? And if you are the right person, I take your choice. But then authorization must take place, that he is authorized to do this. Okay? Only after the authorization, the voter will be allowed to go for R-voting. So manual authorization can be one mechanism, which means through government machinery, you either line up somewhere, you show a form or something, fill up a form, or it could be authentication based authorization. There are two kinds of things which are possible. At the time of voting also, voter needs to be identified, okay? Because at that point in time, voter only must be, it's a distant voting, so voter must be identified that he is an appropriate voter. It can be done for a variety of different ways. It can be, multiple databases have to be used for that. For example, electoral roll data, which is a list of all voters, has to be used for. And there are various other databases which permit online authentication like Aadhaar. Aadhaar allows you biometric or fingerprint or biometric such as fingerprint or iris-based authentication, or even non-biometric such as mobile-based OTP, one-time password-based authentication. Using such kind of databases, one can do an authentication of a person, or it could be using passwords. Okay. Now, this basically is to ensure that voter has voted, voter has come, and therefore, after that, he does not vote again. There are few more issues that actually come up in case of our voting. The booths, the places from where one would actually do our voting, should they be predefined or should they be non-predefined? Now let me explain what it means. It is mainly from the view of software and hardware standardization. Somebody may have a 19-inch screen, somebody may have a 10-inch screen, somebody may be working on a tablet, somebody may be working on a full-fledged laptop or full-fledged computer, somebody may be working, his screen resolution may be 2K by 1K, somebody may be 800 by 600, okay. Somebody may be able to have colors and show colors, somebody may actually have a black and white display. So there are various kinds of things this actually come up. And when actually have such kind of things, then you have a problem of is ballot delivered correctly on the screen or not. Somebody may come up and say, on my screen I could see only 4 candidates. Somebody else may come up and say, I could see 20 candidates. So there are all kind of issues that may come up. And therefore, should there be a predefined e-booth, standardized, or non-predefined? In fact, there are many more things that will actually come up. For example, viruses and malicious software can actually exist on a PC or on a system. Now, when a ballot is delivered, a candidate name from Rajat Muna is replaced by something else. This can actually be done by any malicious software. In fact, this malicious software need not even be specific to the ballot itself. Any packet that is coming in, just look for a string called Rajat Muna and replace it by Mangal Pandey. Right? That's always a possibility. And therefore, there are these notions of, can malicious software render the modified ballot? In other words, maybe, and that's what probably I'm hinting at, that a predefined e-booth might be a solution, because you can then, look at this, standardize the hardware, standardize the software, look at, and see whether there is any malicious software or not. The second option is pre-assigned versus unassigned booth. That means a voter, should he go to a specific remote voting booth, or can he go anywhere on any booth? So should it be a pre-assigned or unassigned booth? And based on this, there are 3 different configurations which are possible. Predefined pre-assigned electronic booth, predefined unassigned electronic booth, and vote anywhere system. No predefined. Of course, it doesn't make any sense to say it is non-predefined electronic booth but assigned, because they cannot actually go. So there are, out of 4, we have only 3 possibilities. In predefined booth needs to be predefined. Quality of ballot delivery can be ensured. In summary, the booth can be ensured to be void of malicious software, keyloggers, etc., to ensure that there is a vote privacy. And support can be provided for vernacular languages, screen layouts, and these kind of things. Pre-assigned versus unassigned booth. I already talked about this, whether, basically, whether you have a pre-assigned or unassigned. For audit trail purposes, one needs to have a location defined for every e-booth. Now, coming to the vote confidentiality, the voter has voted. This particular fact can be established using voter attendance system. And voter confidentiality, vote confidentiality can also be ensured using the encryption at the voter end by suitable encryption mechanism. and we can talk about that. Decryption of this vote can actually take place only on the voting day, right? So vote confidentiality need not be there on the counting day. Sorry, only on the counting day, not on voting day. Only on the counting day. There is a system called dual lock system, because you need to actually encrypt the thing at voter end, decrypt partially to handle the voter attendance or some other management things, but not the vote confidentiality, and decrypt again on the day of counting. So that's why you need to have a dual lock system or dual encryption system, right? So I will talk about this a little bit later. Vote anonymity. The vote should not carry any identity of the voter, the vote part, right? The management data may carry the voter identity in some way. But if you don't carry the voter identity, then there are a few more issues that will actually come up, and I'll talk about how we can actually handle that. In a predefined e-booth, this can be ensured by having two separate systems. So if there is a predefined e-booth, one could be for verification, you go and verify, right? And this is not connected to the actual polling system. So this is for voter verification and attendance system. Another one could be for actual voting. So since these two systems are decoupled, the voter and a vote anonymity can be ensured by just the process itself. However, the vote will still need to have location ID and possibly a serial number for audit trails. For somewhere later we want to actually verify something or the other. In vote anywhere system, the vote anonymity can be ensured by a software. So software must be delivered to the voting machine, which can be, for example, downloaded from the website of the ECI or whatever. But using that, the software can define or software can provide the vote anonymity. It probably is just an encryption system, dual lock system or whatever, which provides various kinds of standardized mechanisms. In India, we need to actually adopt e-voting because of the problems that I talked about earlier, especially for service voters and NRI voters. Now, therefore, we need to move forward from this point. And as we move forward, we need to look at various things. First, we need to define what e-configuration should be. This means, how should the voter be registered? Should it be a pre-assigned or unassigned booth? Should it be a e-booth or voting anywhere, predefined booth or voting anywhere? Or should it be a voter identification and attendance system has to be defined? The cryptography system, the encryption, decryption, and various other mechanisms have to be defined. But then all of this sounds very complicated. The solution must be simple, and it must be simple, driven by processes which are simple to comprehend by the voters and everybody else. Now, I have two scenarios that I talked about: e-postal ballot and remote voting, R-voting. Now, in e-postal ballot, the problem is the following. So, this is not the scenario, but I thought I should write down a scenario. So, let's say e-voter connects to a website and authenticates himself. This is the first step. Using Aadhaar-based login or OTP as a password, or using passport number as login and another OTP as password or whatever. And then a PDF file containing the ballot can be delivered to the voter. So, it is just saved by the voter. Voter can then print it, number of times he can in fact print it. In fact, this can also have instructions on how to vote and how to send the vote. Okay? This can be printed by the voter. And if it can be printed by the voter, voter can print it multiple number of times. Voter can even photocopy it, right? The printed ballot is then marked by the voter and the vote is then sent to the returning officer as per the instruction. The thing is, he should be sending only one vote. And this is by postal mechanism. The authorization code must be provided on each ballot and it must be unique so that each e-voter, when he actually prints or photocopies, he actually gets the same authorization code, which is not duplicatable, which is non-guessable, and a e-voter gets the same authorization code every time. Because this authorization code can actually identify whether you receive a duplicate vote at the receiving end, and therefore they can be handled at that point in time. The votes must be opened only on the day of counting, which means this authorization code has to be, this management data has to be handled in a different way. And therefore, a dual envelope system or a dual locking system is important in here. The scenario 2 is a remote voting or internet-based voting, where e-voter again connects to the website, but this time he gets a web page containing the ballot corresponding to his constituency, and that is rendered on the screen. So if he wants to print, he can print it, but that printing is useless, right? The voter then marks the vote onto this web page. The vote is then encrypted in appropriate manner right onto the same machine. It is encrypted right onto the same machine of the voter. The encrypted string is then attached to the vote attendance system. So you basically get the vote, encrypt it, you got some string. Attached to that, the attendance information that the voter has voted. Now you got one more string, encrypt it again. So that's a dual lock system. Encrypt it again. The outer encryption is for attendance management and inner encryption is for actual vote, and it should be decrypted only on the day of the counting. I think in this process, e-vote registration is an important thing. There are various schemes which are possible. E-voter must be a voter first of all. So e-voter is not a separate voter. He is a voter, but he is opting. So it's rather than the registration of voter, it is more like registration of the choice of voting. So he must be in the electoral rolls. His name must be, so there are, if you are looking at Aadhaar based authentication, and Aadhaar must be available for him. The manual registration system, or should be a manual registration system, variety of things, okay. But once registered, it should be marked in the electoral roll that he is not allowed for DRE or manual voting. Maybe we also need to know his likely location for voting, primarily for planning purposes, so that we know that on a particular e-polling booth, there should not be too big a queue. I think with this, I come to end of my talk. I thought I have been able to give, summarize the challenges. In the course of the day, we are actually going to look at solutions which are available from various people. A lot of people have worked in this